My wife called me useless for not having a degree, so I started a business that now pays her student loans without her even knowing it. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and if I'm being completely honest, I've always felt like I was running a different race than everyone else around me. I grew up in a working-class family where the main goal wasn't getting a college degree. It was just keeping the lights on and food on the table. My dad worked long shifts at a factory, and my mom juggled 2 part-time jobs. The unspoken rule in our house was simple: survive first, dream later. So, while my high school classmates filled out college applications, I went straight into the workforce. I stacked boxes in warehouses, worked retail floors during holiday rushes, and spent nights fixing things for neighbors just to scrape by. I didn't mind it, honestly. I liked working with my hands, seeing a problem and solving it right there in front of me. But deep down, a part of me always wondered if I'd made the wrong choice. Not because I hated what I did, but because the world never lets you forget you don't have a degree. Then came my wife. She's smart, ambitious, and graduated with honors. Her family is the kind that hangs framed diplomas on the wall like trophies, each one proof of how accomplished they are. At first, I admired that about her. The drive, the determination, the pride. But over time, I started noticing the small differences. She carried her education like armor, and I carried my lack of it like a shadow. Whenever we'd go to gatherings with her parents, conversations would shift to careers, promotions, or graduate school. I'd sit there quietly, feeling like the odd one out. I didn't say much, but inside, I carried this gnawing insecurity that maybe I wasn't enough, and I never thought the woman I loved would use that insecurity as a weapon against me. At first, it was subtle. Little comments that seemed harmless on the surface but stung in ways I couldn't put into words. My wife would tease, "You're so lucky you didn't have to suffer through finals like I did," followed by a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. It wasn't said with love. It was said like she was pointing out a gap between us, one she thought I could never close. One evening, we went out to dinner with a group of her college friends. The kind of people who wore tailored clothes and talked casually about promotions and grad school applications. When the conversation shifted toward careers, one of them asked, "So, what do you do?" Before I could answer, my wife jumped in. "Oh, he's still figuring things out." She said it with this awkward chuckle like she was embarrassed to admit I stacked boxes in a warehouse. The table laughed politely, but I felt like the punchline of a joke I never agreed to be part of. I smiled through it, even managed a nod, but inside, I wanted to sink into the floor. It didn't stop there. Whenever her classmates came up in conversation, she'd casually slip in comparisons. "Remember Alex? He just got promoted to senior analyst." Or Jenna. "She's moving to New York for her MBA. Isn't that amazing?" I'd nod, pretending I was impressed, but deep down, it just reminded me of everything I wasn't. I told myself I was being sensitive, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But at night, lying next to her while she scrolled through LinkedIn and talked about people moving forward, I couldn't shake the feeling I was standing still. Those little digs weren't just words. They were seeds of something much bigger. It happened on a Tuesday night, over something as ordinary as bills. We were sitting at the kitchen table, papers scattered everywhere, rent, utilities, her student loan statements, all piling up like bricks on my chest. I was trying to explain how tight things were, how we needed to cut back on some of the extras for a while. She slammed her hand down, rattling the stack of envelopes. "Cut back? You know what the real problem is?" Her voice was sharp, each word like it had been waiting to leap out. "The problem is you. You're useless without a degree." For a second, the world went silent. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, even my own breath, it all just stopped. I stared at her, wondering if I'd misheard, but her eyes were hard, unblinking, like she meant every syllable. Useless. That word echoed in my head like a cruel mantra. I wanted to defend myself, to shout back that I'd been working nonstop since I was 18, that every bill in this house had my sweat in it. But the words caught in my throat, choked out by humiliation. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the crumpled bill in my hand, feeling something inside me crack. In that moment, it wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. Or maybe the realization that she didn't have any for me at all. Not as a man, not as her partner. She went on, muttering under her breath about how her friends' husbands had real careers, but I didn't hear the rest. I was too busy swallowing the bitterness, letting it burn a hole straight through me. That night, I promised myself I'd prove her wrong, but not in the way she expected. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Useless without a degree. They echoed in my head over and over, twisting into something I couldn't ignore. I knew lashing out or arguing wouldn't fix anything. I had to prove my worth, not for her, but for myself. And if she was going to underestimate me, fine. I'd work in the shadows. I started spending nights on my laptop after she went to bed, researching anything that could teach me how to make real money. YouTube tutorials, business podcasts, free online courses, whatever I could find. I absorbed every tip, every lesson like it was oxygen. Slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. A small business I could start without a college degree but with enough hustle to succeed. I considered e-commerce, digital marketing, even small handyman services. I wrote notes, drew diagrams, and set tiny goals for myself that no one else could see. She noticed the late-night laptop glow, but scoffed. "What are you doing up there again? Watching cat videos?" She joked one night, not even looking up from her phone. I forced a laugh and shrugged. "Just scrolling," I said. And in a way, she believed it, because that's what I wanted her to think. During the days, I acted the part of the guy who wasn't moving forward, as she'd put it. I went to work like usual, smiled through her comments, and kept my ambitions hidden. There was a thrill in it, a quiet sense of power. I wasn't letting her words define me anymore. I was quietly building the thing that would eventually change everything. Some nights, exhaustion hit me like a brick. Late hours, endless research, juggling work, pretending nothing was happening. It was draining. But each time I thought about her smug face, thinking she'd won, I felt a spark of determination. She thought I was scrolling mindlessly. In reality, I was building something that would change both of our lives. I finally took the plunge. I emptied my modest savings into the first version of my business, convinced that all the late nights of research and planning would pay off. But reality hit harder than I expected. Orders were slow, clients changed their minds, suppliers delayed shipments, and my brilliant ideas felt like they were crashing around me. Nights blurred into mornings as I stayed up tweaking spreadsheets, responding to emails, and trying to figure out why nothing seemed to work. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was mental. Every setback felt personal, like I was failing not just at business, but at proving to myself that I was capable. I remember one night staring at my laptop, eyes dry and aching, the glow of the screen reflecting off the empty coffee mugs on the counter. My hands trembled slightly, and I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. And then there was her. She didn't hold back her thoughts. One evening, while I was collapsing onto the couch after another 14-hour day, she shook her head with that familiar mix of disbelief and irritation. "See? This is why people go to college," she said, smirking. "Maybe if you'd taken your education seriously, you wouldn't be chasing pipe dreams." I forced a smile and nodded, swallowing the lump of anger and shame in my throat. Part of me wanted to throw in the towel, to accept that maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. For days, I wrestled with the thought of quitting. I wondered if I was just fooling myself, if I'd been naive to believe that someone without a degree could create something meaningful. I nearly let her words define me, nearly let her judgment crush every ounce of hope I had. I nearly believed her, until one night, something shifted. I'll never forget the day it happened. I was sprawled across the floor of my tiny apartment, laptop open, caffeine-fueled and exhausted, when an email notification popped up. My heart skipped a beat as I read it. A client, one of the bigger ones I'd been chasing for weeks, had officially signed on. They were willing to pay a sum that could cover months of bills, and then some. I stared at the screen, disbelief and exhilaration warring in my chest. It wasn't a fortune. Not yet. But for the first time, I felt it. The undeniable proof that I was capable, that my efforts weren't just flailing in the dark. I sat back, hands trembling, and allowed myself a small, almost guilty smile. I wanted to shout it from the rooftops to finally show her that I could do something real, but I didn't. She still thought I was figuring things out, so I kept up the act. During the day, I went to work like I always did, nodded through her teasing, and kept my nights free for client calls, emails, and planning. It was exhausting, juggling the reality of success with the persona of failure I still had to maintain. But there was a thrill in it, a quiet, intoxicating sense of power. Every text from the client, every small payment processed, felt like a secret victory. I was living a double life, and for the first time, it didn't feel like deceit. It felt like justice. I was proving myself not to her, not to anyone else, but to the version of me that had been ridiculed and dismissed for so long. And the best part? She had no clue. She still thought I was failing, still assumed I'd never amount to anything. If only she knew. By this point, my business was starting to gain momentum. Late nights became the norm, and the apartment was filled with the soft glow of my laptop and the quiet hum of the heater. Phone calls, emails, and small tasks stacked up one after the other, but I welcomed it. Every challenge, every late-night problem-solving session felt like a step toward proving something, not just to her, but to myself. The irony was brutal. By day, she assumed I was lazy, distant, maybe even wasting time. "You're always tired," she'd sigh as if my exhaustion were self-inflicted. "Maybe you need to focus on something real for once." She had no idea that those nights I seemed distracted were filled with strategizing clients, processing orders, and negotiating deals. I was working harder than ever, and a large part of that work was quietly funding the life she'd bragged about to everyone. Some nights, I could hear her laughter drifting from the living room as she talked to friends, mocking my sluggish ambition again. A part of me ached with humiliation, but another part, one that had been buried under years of ridicule, thrived on it. Every insult, every underhanded comment fueled my determination. I developed a rhythm to my double life: smiles in the daylight, hustle in the shadows. I became adept at compartmentalizing, acting like the same man she'd always dismissed, while quietly building something that would eventually make her words meaningless. There was a strange thrill in living this lie, a sense of quiet justice I couldn't share with anyone. Each day, the business grew a little more, the client list expanded, and my confidence quietly swelled. And yet, she remained completely oblivious to it all, still treating me like the man who hadn't figured things out. Every insult fueled me more, but she had no idea what I was becoming. It was a Friday night when she invited a few friends over. The apartment smelled faintly of takeout and her signature vanilla candle, the one that always made the living room feel artificially warm. I tried to stay relaxed, keeping my tone light as I poured drinks and moved around. But there was an invisible tension in the air I couldn't shake. The conversation inevitably shifted toward careers, as it always did. One of her friends, sipping her wine with a knowing smirk, leaned back and said, "So, what are you doing these days? Still figuring things out without a degree?" The words landed like bricks. I froze mid-step, a glass shaking slightly in my hand, and felt every eye in the room glance in my direction. I looked at my wife for some kind of defense, some glimmer of support. Instead, she laughed. Not nervously, not awkwardly, she laughed like I'd been the punchline of the night. The warmth of the candlelight felt almost cruel, highlighting the disbelief in her friend's eyes and the amusement in hers. For the first time, I felt truly invisible in my own home. I was standing there, working harder than I ever had, quietly building a life, and yet in that moment I was reduced to the man she thought I was. A failure, an underachiever, a joke. My stomach sank, and my chest felt heavy, as if I couldn't inhale enough air to fill the emptiness that was settling over me. The laughter, the whispers, the way they casually dismissed my existence. It crushed me. Every fiber of me wanted to scream, to storm out, to demand respect, but I stayed. I kept pouring the drinks, smiling when it was expected, nodding when they spoke. By the time the evening ended and the apartment fell silent, I slumped onto the couch, feeling smaller than I ever had. The humiliation lingered like smoke, thick and suffocating. That night, I nearly walked out for good. A few months after that low night, everything changed. My business finally hit its stride. Orders came in consistently. Emails from clients no longer filled me with panic but with satisfaction. The hours I'd poured into research, calls, and late-night problem-solving were finally paying off. For the first time, I could see the fruits of my labor taking shape, not as a distant dream, but as a reality I controlled. I had more than enough to cover our household bills. Rent, utilities, groceries, all taken care of without anyone having to stress about money. And then, almost as an afterthought, I realized I could finally take care of something that had always been a shadow over our lives: her student loans. Without telling her, I set up automatic payments that slowly but steadily chipped away at her debt. It was strange, this mix of satisfaction and secrecy. During the day, she would gush to friends over the phone, her voice full of pride. "I've finally gotten on top of my student loans. Can you believe it?" And I smiled quietly from the other room, watching her celebrate a victory that, unbeknownst to her, was mine to claim as well. There was no gloating, no smug texts or passive-aggressive comments, just the quiet joy of knowing that the man she had once called useless was now silently supporting her entire life in ways she couldn't even imagine. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every insult, every mocking comment, had fueled this moment. I kept up the routine, smiling, nodding, pretending nothing had changed, while the business grew. The bills were paid, and her loans slowly disappeared. It felt almost poetic, a secret justice that needed no applause. She bragged about paying off her debt, never realizing it was me doing it all. It didn't take long for her to notice the change. The constant tension over money, the hushed arguments, the frugal dinners, the panic over every bill seemed to have evaporated almost overnight. One evening, as we sat on the couch scrolling through our phones, she glanced up with a curious smile. "Did you get a raise or something?" she asked, tilting her head as if she'd just discovered a small mystery. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "Nothing big," I said. "Just some stuff at work." It was vague, intentionally so. She didn't press, and I let the silence stretch comfortably between us. The last thing I wanted was to reveal the secret that had taken months to build, the careful balance between her perception and the reality I controlled. The next weekend, her parents came over for dinner, the smell of roasted chicken filling the apartment. They complimented her on her responsible management of finances, praising her for keeping the bills and savings in check. She beamed with pride, clearly enjoying their admiration. I sat quietly, nodding along, the irony burning inside me. They were congratulating her for something she thought she had accomplished alone, but it was all because of the late nights, the hustle, and the silent grind I had kept hidden. Her friends continued to gush over her newfound financial independence, and she soaked it all up, unaware that I had orchestrated it behind the scenes. The mixture of satisfaction and restraint became addictive. I loved watching the puzzle pieces fall into place, knowing the truth, yet letting her live in blissful ignorance. I almost told her then, but something held me back. The thought of revealing everything lingered in the back of my mind, tempting me with the idea of instant vindication. But I knew timing mattered. Patience, strategy, and the quiet satisfaction of watching her remain oblivious. That was far sweeter than any immediate confrontation. It started like any other argument. We were sitting in the living room, bills and reminders scattered across the coffee table, when she snapped. I don't know why I even bother sometimes. "You're useless. You've never had a real job, and you'll never amount to anything without a degree." Normally, I might have stayed silent, swallowed the words, or let them fester. But something had shifted in me over the past months. I took a deep breath, letting the anger and frustration settle into something steadier. Calm, controlled, deliberate. I met her eyes, steady and unwavering. "You think I'm useless?" I said quietly. She laughed nervously, expecting the same old defeat. "I guess it's time you knew the truth." Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I run a business," I said, each word deliberate, heavy with meaning. "A successful one. And for months now, I've been paying off your student loans. Every single payment, without you knowing." For a moment she just stared, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. Shock, disbelief, and a creeping sense of awe all mingled on her face. She couldn't find words. The room, usually filled with her constant chatter and critique, fell silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and strong, contrasting sharply with the pounding rush of adrenaline in my veins. I watched as the tables turned, not in some petty revenge, but in quiet vindication. I was no longer the man she dismissed. I was the man who had worked harder, sacrificed more, and built something she could never have imagined. The power dynamic had shifted, and I finally felt what it meant to reclaim my dignity. She opened her mouth, probably searching for a comeback, an insult, or some way to belittle me again. But there was nothing left, nothing to say. For the first time, she had nothing left to say. After the reveal, the apartment felt different. Heavier in some ways, but clearer. I could finally breathe, knowing the truth was out, that the secret I'd carried for months had finally come to light. And yet, as powerful as the moment felt, I realized something important. I hadn't done this for revenge. I hadn't built the business just to prove a point or humiliate her. I had done it for myself, for my own sense of worth, for the man I knew I could become, despite the insults and dismissals. She tried to apologize the next morning, her voice hesitant, almost fragile. I didn't realize. I'm sorry, she said, wringing her hands. I looked at her, feeling the calm strength that had grown inside me over the months. I nodded slowly. Apology accepted, I said, but I made one thing very clear: respect matters. If you can't respect me for who I am, then there's nothing left here. The rest of this life, our marriage, depends on that respect. There was a long silence as she absorbed my words. She realized that this wasn't just about money or degrees or student loans. It was about self-worth, boundaries, and the fact that for too long, I had let her words define me. I wouldn't allow that anymore. I felt lighter, stronger, empowered in a way I never had before. The house was the same, the routines unchanged, but I had changed. I had built a life quietly, strategically, and fiercely, one she had underestimated at every turn, and the irony wasn't lost on me. She had spent years mocking the useless guy without a degree, never imagining that same man was the one quietly creating the stability, security, and life she now depended on. Turns out, the useless guy without a degree built the life she's standing on.